Okay, when you're ready.
Awesome. You ready, Dave? Everybody ready in the room? I've lost the visual on you, but I did see you before, so it's good to see all of you guys again. I didn't remember to wear my purple shirt today. Hopefully you won't hold that against me. Hey, so I wanted to give you guys a quick overview of RouterOS v7. You've been hearing about it for such a long time, and you've probably have heard multiple times that we're not deploying it yet on our infrastructure. So I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about that. So I'm going to do a couple things. We're going to answer the burning questions right up front. We're going to look at 2 docs fairly quickly, and then I'm going to do a Winbox demo, and then we're going to have some open-ended discussion towards the end. So the first question is, can we use it on our infrastructure yet? The answer is no. There's been 2 reasons for that. Up until now, it's principally been because it's been in heavy development. There hasn't been feature parity between version 6 and version 7. There were lots and lots of bugs. The feature parity is pretty much there today. The configuration, however, between version 6 and version 7, to us externally using Winbox looks pretty much the same, but the internals have changed. And so we have some back-end tools that, and at least one script that I know of, that we need to update in order to make it ready for us. So coming soon, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, which is nice. The other component to that for the infrastructure is, since version 7 is still in heavy development, there are lots of updates, probably once a month at least. And so it makes it a little bit difficult for us with systems that we can only get to, like, 9 months out of the year, we can't get to a system. And so we want to have a fairly stable improvement software for up there. But for home use, it's a different story. If you're not using any of the caveats, which I'll go over here in just a moment, then it looks, so far, it's looking pretty reliable on QTH systems. And the upgrade process, since you asked, is actually very simple. You make a backup of the v6 configuration. You update the router like you normally would with 2 reboots, and then you make another backup with the v7 configuration. You keep the v6 around just in case you have to go back and put v6 back on in case you discover something's not working. There was something else I was going to mention about that, but it's out of my head. So let's move on. Why do we want to go to RouterOS v7? Well, let's have a look at their official documentation.
As you're sharing, so I had a quick question, Joey. Was you're sharing that is,
yes.
Do you, I noticed, you'd mentioned being able to go back to RouterOS 6. What happens if I buy a new router? Can that be downgraded, or am I stuck?
That is a very good question. I don't know the answer to that question.
I have the answer to that question.
Go for it, John.
So if you buy a RouterOS 7 router, it is a RouterOS 7 router, and you cannot go back. It's not possible. The Mountain Broadband folks have tried it, and there is a little message that pops up and says that the hardware is too new for the software version that you are installing, and it basically rejects it.
There we go. We have the authoritative answer there. Another good reason for us to not jump into upgrading right away. All right, so let's have a look at what MikroTik released. So I'm going to give you just a high-level version. We'll get into it. So initially, you might have seen this document from them. Are you ready for RouterOS v7? Let's kind of look at some of the changes that they talk about here. The first is they're using a brand new Linux kernel behind the scenes. And that allows them to do a number of positive things. For me personally, I like the fact that they're now able to apply better and faster security updates to their software, but now it comes with newer drivers, more efficiency, and WireGuard, which is another high-speed VPN choice for us. On the efficiency, I'm running it. I'm coming to you through a RouterOS v7 router right now, and it's a 4011, and I've noticed about a 10% decrease in overhead. So we still haven't tested this on some of the other boxes that we have in the network, but across the board, people are reporting that it's more efficient. It's not going to make your little mini hap a Ferrari, but certainly on mine it also helps. So the kernel and new features is there. There's some changes in routing, which is really where this impacts us, because the back end configuration that's hidden from us, from the users, most of it at least, has changed between 6 and 7. And when you upgrade your router from version 6 to version 7, and for that upgrade, what I had forgotten earlier was to remind you that you should always be on the latest version of version 6, whichever, if you're on the stable or the long-term version, make sure you upgrade to that first, and then from there you can launch into V7. When you deploy or upgrade into version 7, there is a migration routine that happens behind the scenes that will convert the config files, the version 6 config files, to version 7, with some caveats, which I'll talk about here in just a few moments. So routing has changed. They've combined all the routing into a different hood. It's essentially a brand new operating system. They've rebuilt it from square one. The good news is, because they've done that, it's much faster. We don't use border gateway protocol today, so this doesn't impact us at all, but some new routing filters in general for networking, which I'll demo. OSPF we do use quite a bit. It's now a separate process, and they've merged version 2 and version 3 together. They've added some additional features here. And this is in part why some things don't quite work, or why things have changed, and we have to update our own scripts for this. The rest of the stuff, MPLS, we don't really care about. There's a new user manager, which we don't use. If you're familiar with Zero Tier, Zero Tier is a private LAN that you can run a client on your computer, run a client on your router, and you could essentially make a private LAN for everything. That is now finally supported. Now that most other people have moved to a different system, Tailscale, and that's it. There's really not a whole lot. There's a bunch of other little changes here, which you'll see. You can read through this. The CRS 300 devices get some nice hardware acceleration, so that's a big win for us. We have a couple of those deployed in places, but that's pretty much it. So let me take you away from this and bring you over to documentation. So the first thing I want to point out, you won't be able to see it here on my screen share, but you'll notice this looks different from the wiki. And that's because on MikroTik, we do not use the wiki for version 7. We do not use the wiki for version 7. We use help.mikrotik.com. help.mikrotik.com. As you may be able to see on the screen share here, it's an Atlassian Confluence component. So the old wiki is gone, but there is a search function in here. You can find the information. They're slowly building it out. They sometimes lag a little bit in updating the documentation, but generally it's still pretty good. So here's the new features that you can find on the website. So they've re-implemented a brand new network time protocol, NTP. There's some new command line interface with at least a large portion of backwards compatibility to version 6, but not completely backwards compatible. You can now do Let's Encrypt certificate generation, which we don't typically use, but it's available for you. A bunch of other things as you scan through the list. OpenVPN, one that will help us is this one here. It's OpenVPN UDP transport. In version 6, OpenVPN only used TCP, and with UDP we can get higher throughput if we're able to enable it. And then WireGuard, which is currently super fast. I've been very happy. I've been running a test WireGuard VPN instance on my local one, and I get almost full speed. And by full speed, I'm on a 1 gig fiber connection. I get almost the full gig over a WireGuard connection. So hot darn. So some other interesting different things here, as you could see. As we scroll up, here's where we get to the caveats. So up here, version set, this is under RouterOS getting started, upgrading to version 7. Here's that feature parity list, and you can see that for things that we don't use user manager, we don't use BGP, we don't use MPLS. We're okay there, but you'll notice for OSPF and routing filters, we have some caveats, which is part of the reason why for QTH routers, with certainly a notable exception of mine and maybe Jeff Carrier. We don't use we don't use OSPF on our QTH systems. So if you're not using those, you stand a really good chance. When I upgraded, by the way, it took about 5 minutes tops, 2 reboots, and I had to change nothing. It was a fairly painless process. So let's look at the OSPF and the routing filters. So all known configurations will upgrade from 6 to 7. I've certainly tested that on my end, and it is correct. The OSPF 2 and 3 instances now are in a single menu, and there's some templates. So really, so far, there hasn't been any big changes for OSPF for the way that we've implemented it, thankfully. Because as Willem and John and Ben and others there in the room will tell you, OSPF can be a real pain to deal with. The other component here, routing filters. So they've added some new syntax to the routing filters, and they've added some additional capabilities for us. And there's some examples here. I'll see. I haven't pulled this up, but it looks kind of the same that you're familiar with. There's just more detail. We've also noticed in the log files, there's more detail as well. So let's get into it. Let me stop the share here, and let me launch Winbox. So you guys can see what Winbox looks like. And I'm going to demo this on my live router, the one I'm using to talk to you on. All right, so Winbox is coming up on my end, and I'm going to share Winbox here. Share window. Okay, here we have Winbox.
Put it in safe mode.
Oh, I'm not going to make any changes. Famous last words. If I disappear, you know what happens. So here's the routing filters. I happen to have the routing filters up. We were looking at this last night. It looks the same. The one piece that we still haven't tested is this script here. Willem has done, I think Willem is to blame or to praise. Willem has created a little filter here, which when it runs, it puts a filter in, it identifies what your IP address is, your public IP, and it puts a filter in there so that you are not sending OSPF information out over the internet. In my case, because I'm not connected to other MikroTik computers, not so much of a big deal. But for systems that we have that are connected to Mountain Broadband, who do use this, you could get some pollution in there. So that's one of the reasons we do that in here. So the first thing I want to show you about, which is kind of really important that nobody really talks about, is packages. You'll notice there is just one package. Gone are the days where we could turn off Wi-Fi or turn off the IPv6, the things that we don't want. We can't do that any longer. So you can't unload that material. So it's all there. Let me go back here. So and this works the same though. You could check for updates. You could see where you're at. Works exactly the same way as it did previously. Let's go look at the things that have changed, the ones that you'll notice the most, aside from extra pieces. There's WireGuard. So here you can see my WireGuard tunnel running. And if I click on it, it's the same. Pop over here. I have a public key, right? It's the same sort of view you're familiar with, the same standard Winbox, same standard MikroTik view. It'll show me peers, so I can show you peers here. This happens to be an IPv6 connection for me. So nothing's really changed there. Nothing's changed on the interfaces, really. Nothing that you'll see anyway. You can go in and click on things like here's the Lee Hill connection. You can go in and it looks exactly the same. Overall stats, etc. In here, just from a layman's view. Pieces that have changed, though, you'll notice are going to be under routing. And you can't see this pop up for some reason on my screen. I am sorry about that. So this is OSPF, and I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to wrap up here pretty quickly to catch up so that you guys leave on time. You'll notice we have an instance. We now call the instances when you upgrade are now called default v2, and in here we have a little bit more detail. And you can see all this stuff comes preloaded from when you upgrade OSPF from a version 6 to version 7. The jury is still out among us whether or not we want to create this from scratch or do an upgrade. The general consensus is when we update a big system like Thoridan, we probably want to build it from scratch and test it as opposed to doing an update. Here you can see the backbones. You now have a little bit more information as you click on this. Here's my Lee Hill. Here's my Lee Hill. This page looks exactly the same though, pretty much. Your interfaces. These are a little different. Now you have addresses in here. It tells you where they're coming across, the instance. Here's your cost and your priority. Here's our area. Our default area has always been 0, so nothing's really changed here. And then we could still see our neighbors. And then here's all of our populated routes. This has changed a bit. Now, one thing I will show you that has changed in OSPF, and then I'll open it up to questions there, is this page. So this is my log, and you can see how let's see if that works. There we go. So in version 2, there's a little bit better, sorry, in version 7, there's a little bit better logging for OSPF errors. As most of us will tell you, diagnosing OSPF errors is it's a bit of black magic. Here we have at least more descriptive answers and more descriptive items. And so this error, as you look into it, based on what I'm seeing, it tells me that there's another system that's on the Lee Hill sector that occasionally is throwing some bad routes, and we need to look at that. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. And I'm going to open it up for basic questions and see what kind of questions do you guys have that we haven't answered already.
Question is, does version 6 and version 7 play nice together?
So far, they play nice together with the possible caveat of OSPF.
Desperately need version 7.
Sorry, Wim, I only heard part of that. One more time, please.
The question is, what is the desperate need for version 7? What's the reason why we have to switch to version 7?
Because Joey needs another hole in his head.
More gray hair. Yes. So the principal reason that MikroTik upgraded was simply because of kernel. At least that's what they keep telling us. That they've been using an older Linux kernel. The older Linux kernel eventually is falling out of support. They want to take advantage of, as we saw briefly in that little red document I put up, they want to take advantage of newer features and newer kernels to be able to do newer things and to be able to do existing topics like OSPF better. They want to be able to add WireGuard. They want to be able to add zero tier. Some of this you could do on the older kernels, but in general, the newer Linux kernels are all around simply better because they've obviously been improved over the years. If you want to lecture, by the way, if you want to lecture on the advantages of upgrading the kernels, Ben, sitting there in the back of the room, I'm sure would love to geek out and tell you all the differences, because I think that, at least in part, is his day job.
He's shrugging and going, not me, not me.
Not me. And I'll tell you that upgrading to the newer version of Linux and newer version of Linux kernel and the new version of RouterOS v7, it does allow some efficiency gains, which means you can prolong the life of some hardware. Or existing hardware could handle slightly increased capacity, or will have increased capacity, so higher loads. Any other questions?
Just sort of a general observation. I mean, I've actually installed from scratch a number of 7s. And the only thing that I struggled with a little bit is that the OSPF nomenclature has changed. So what used to be just an interface is now a template and things like that. That's actually relatively easy to overcome. You just have to jump through a couple of other hoops. The biggest issue is going to be the routing filters, because before the routing filters, you had either a template or something that you could just fill in the values, and now it's completely free format. So the interface doesn't give you a lot of help writing the correct filter. And that's really the only thing I had to complain about it, especially given that the examples that they show in the documentation used to throw a syntax error when you actually put it on the real router.
Yeah, there's definitely some changes, but the good news is that almost everything that we use today, works just fine. So, all right, with no more questions, let's end here so we catch back up on our presentation.